line by Woody Allen. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plan. So, in the business world, this is absolutely true of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs. Whatever plan you may make, one thing you can be sure of, it will be thrown out of the window. So that's why this panel, and there are no further questions to ask. All three of you have to just tell us this journey, and it's just a coincidence that all three of them had a fairly successful professional career, and yet you chose to take the entrepreneurship path when it wasn't as popular or fashionable. So just take us through this journey of plans going awry, things going wrong, and yet how did you overcome it? How did you build resilience? Was it natural? What did you went through? Just tell us your stories quickly.
So it was the...
Think about it as though you're narrating these stories to your grandchildren.
So I got to guess, fast forward another 20 years. But it was the year 2000 when I decided to become an entrepreneur, and I founded this company which is called Go for Careers, which was then the careers vertical in a horizontal called Go for I. It was built with capital from JP Morgan Chase and had a pretty high-profile launch. But when we built the website to go live with it, we found that if we searched for a doctor in Nagpur, we'll get an engineer in Calcutta. The algorithm just wouldn't work. And to be an online website with a search engine that does not work meant that you just can't make any progress in the market. So within 1 month of going live, we actually turned offline and made this a human resources company which found people through the physical process, and we had a fulfillment that was done offline. And then we grew it from there to becoming what is today India's largest HR service company. So that is the first trip up that we had, and the change that we had to make from what we started with to what we ended up with.
That's a very short story, but we'll come back to it.
So I wanted to retire. So, you know, a normal guy who works in a company. So, Vineet, I was a butterfly. I've now become an ant. So I was listening intently. So no, I got the sequence wrong. So in my mid-30s, I was in the Tatas, actually. I was posted to Taj. I ran some hotels at the Taj. And I got very bored, and I went through the male menopause. Okay, and men go through the menopause here. It's called andropause, for those of you who don't know. And I decided to retire as quickly as I could, but I had no money. Yeah, I'm still going through it. Pramod is an old friend who knows. So how do you retire? So I had two very close friends of mine, and I remember we went, in those days, single malt was very expensive for us. So we, scrimped a bit and bought 2 bottles of single malt, went for a weekend to one forest lodge, and we decided we needed 5 crores to retire. Because if invested well, you'd get 50 lakhs, and we were simple chaps, we still are. So I had 1 crore rupees, 70 lakhs of mine, 30 lakhs, which I borrowed from my wife. I invested it in the dot-com bubble. And in 9 days, it became 3 lakhs. I still remember it. So that was my first entrepreneurial thing. So what did I learn, by the way?
That was your first
That's how I
venture.
learned resilience, which is never bet the bank, whatever happens, no matter how sexy the opportunity, don't bet the bank. Number 2, always have plan B, C, D, E. And don't think to, don't get a bloated head. My mother didn't slap me, unfortunately. She should have. But I was broke. So I was looking for plan B, and A.T. Kearney was coming to India. So they offered me a senior director partnership. And the only question I asked them was, can I make 5 crores in 2 years? So I remember the CEO looked at me oddly, but felt I was showing great signs of intellect by asking such direct questions. Said yes, I joined. And 2 years later, I had 5 crores, which was quite a large sum in those days. And I decided, because I had run in the Taj, I had run all the business hotels, and I had an idea of what was right and what was wrong. So one thing I've learned in my professional life is what not to do, actually, not what to do. So I said, I won't make these following mistakes. So I built a small hotel. I was lucky, about a dozen people joined me from the Taj. The hotel was enormously successful. So I noticed the lady who was announcing it actually halved my company. Actually, we have 8,000 rooms and about 10,000 employees. So bad information by Outlook. Bottom line is that the company did very well. And my instinct to retire was overtaken, actually, by the desires and aspirations of those first 20, 30 people who joined us. And it's been a wonderful journey. We've gone through all kinds of resilience and downs and ups. My broad view on, by the way, on a downturn and an upturn is very simple. By nature, I'm an optimist. Every one of us is either an optimist or pessimist. What I have learned to be is neither. And I think that's been a huge learning for me. So I always, I assume things are going to be, everything will pass. And if you plan for that, then I think you can be reasonably successful in outcomes.
Yes, sure. Patu's, I don't know Isaac, but Patu is being amazingly modest, as was Vineet, because these are enormously successful. And what he's done in a very short period of time is nothing short of astonishing. In an industry which I always thought was never going to survive very long. But my story is actually, I think, a story of necessity. I used to run GE Capital Asia in India. I'd come here looking for the mythical middle class of India, which I never found. We weren't making enough money. I worked for GE under the Welch era, which was a remarkable company, absolutely fabulous company, the most admired in the world for many, many years. And we were expected to, make money, find ways to make money. And in India, as you know, the future is bright and always will be, right? So you're always going to make money at some point in time.
I wish we had done this panel before the minister.
Sorry? Right.
Can I say one thing here? You know what I love about India is what President Ronald Reagan said about Brazil in the late 80s. Somebody asked him, what do you think of Brazil? He said, it's a country with great potential. And it will always have great potential.
Absolutely. It will always have. So I needed to do something to make money. And therefore, I came up with this idea of doing back office business processing for the world out of India. That was my idea, standing in a very hot parking lot in Chennai with my boss and scratching my head and saying, what the hell do we do? We were running an operating center for ourselves. There was a singular problem. The plan was to do this over phone lines in homes with digital technology, trained people, lots of people who understood US GAAP, mortgage accounting, all of the other things we used to do in GE Capital. The only flaw in the plan was phone lines didn't work. We didn't have any people. There were no trained resources, and there was no resources that I could go. There were no office buildings in Gurgaon at that time. Apart from that, it was a very good idea. That's how we started.
Sure, but Ajit, I did not find a low point in your story at all, except for the first venture, which is go-to careers. In your secret diary, you hardly talked about any low points. It was just the first pivot. You started as an online portal. It didn't work quickly. You shifted to offline. It sounds like it's just been a very smooth ride.
So sometimes we also tend to simplify the journey a bit. When we founded in 2007-8, which is exactly 11, 12 years ago, we were a product of the then global financial crisis. And everything that's variable cost inside a company, advertising, recruitment, and related areas, staff welfare, these are all expenses which are discretionary in nature, which companies would put a lid on. So we found that the first 2 years were very difficult. So, and we realized that to be in play, we needed to do other things in addition to human resources, like managed services. And that's when we ventured into facilities management. So in 2008, when we started, our revenues were actually about 8 crores for the first year. This year, we'll be about maybe 11,000 crores. So that's the journey in about 10 years' time. There have been also some pivotal moments. So we had a private equity investor on board. The investor they have an investment time frame of about 5 years' time. So about 2013, they wanted to move on. 2013 was also when the Indian economy was showing a blip because of policy paralysis, and it was the year before the election. And that's when we decided that we don't want another private equity fund. We like to have long-term capital. We like to have proprietary capital of somebody who does not have to return capital back to their LPs. So that's when we made a connection with Fairfax in Canada, which is an insurance company and invests its own balance sheet. And that, in retrospect, has been a big decision for us, because then our outlook to business became more long-term. Our decision-making was pivoting around long-term decisions and not to create value just on the short term. It was also then that we realized, after Fairfax came on board, that it's good to raise cash to...
How easy or difficult was it to get Fairfax?
Well, the first aspect was Toronto was minus 12 degrees when we went there. And very unwelcoming climate, so to say. But Fairfax is run by a gentleman called Pramod Bhasin. He's of Indian origin. He went as an immigrant and built what is perhaps among the top 5 insurance companies in the world.
Called the Warren Buffett of Canada.
Also known as the Warren Buffett of Canada. He's a gentleman who makes a lot of difference to the moment. He's very perceptive, and he's invested about $5 billion in India, and he's promised to invest another $5 billion. So to find a meeting of mind with him was terrific, because his value system was very clearly aligned to what we wanted to do here. And he backed us completely. He ran a very decentralized empire in a sense. He had 40-odd investments. Each CEO had his own carve-out in terms of space, and you'd meet him maybe once or twice a year, so you got your space to do what you wanted. So to get Fairfax on board was an easy decision. And after that, we decided we'll do an IPO. But when we decided to do an IPO, it was the year 2016, and I still remember this. It was in June or so of that time, and Brexit had just happened. Or it's still happening. They're still threatening to go. It may take some more time. But because Brexit had happened, our bankers suggested that it may be improper to go to markets and attempt to raise money in public markets. A week later, after Brexit happened, Rexit happened. Raghuram Rajan resigned. So you didn't have a Reserve Bank governor, and the markets were very jittery. In spite of it, we decided to go ahead. We listed our stock thereon after we got oversubscribed 145 times. So we had to sell a story of a services company in the business services space which nobody understood. It was the first market offering of this type. And then we listed for about $1 billion or so, and then went on to do a follow-on round. So at various stages, we've had to take decisions that were important, that changed the needle in terms of the direction that we'll follow, and had a significant impact on what the future would be for us. So today we have 380,000 employees. Last year we added 56,000 people. This year, the first 6 months, we've added 59,000 people. So sometimes I'm wondering, where is the dichotomy in the story, so to say, about the slowdown in India. We think that moments like this, when there are difficulties, actually push companies to variabilize costs, to process more of their transactional work outside the company. And companies like us, therefore, have more of an opportunity in such situations, which we are riding on today.
Sure. But listening to his story, it seems to me that the toughest moment he's faced in life is his 7th class exam. Is that not true? He said that's been the toughest point in his life. But Patu, tell me, you faced quite some issues with bureaucracy when you were building various hotels. Especially the swimming pool story is very exciting. You must tell us about that.
So, I think I told you this. So, Winston Churchill once said, if you're 20 and not a communist, you have no heart. And if you're 40 and not a capitalist, you have no brains, right? So somehow I keep reversing this. So, like a butterfly to an ant. So I was a capitalist at 20. I'm now a hardcore communist. So when I was a capitalist, somewhere along this journey, when I built this first hotel, my father, who was a hardcore communist, and I wasn't there, he said, I'm very uncomfortable with you making money because there is so much poverty and inequity in India. So promise me only two things he asked me to do. He said, never give a bribe. And number two is always focus on your employees. So Vineet, it's funny, if you read my articles of 10, 15 years ago, even we said employees come first. In fact, when I went public last year, some press, and they're always up to tricks, as you all know, one of them asked me a question, is it true you said, dash, 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 the shareholders, employees come first? And I said yes, and my investment banker said, are you mad? Because obviously it was a big story that I said, tell shareholders to get lost, in nice words. So when I built my first hotel, I had no money. I had 5 crores. I borrowed 4 crores. Nobody was willing to lend me money because I used to wear jeans. I still do. So I had to call a friend of mine who I knew from my Tata days, who on my personal guarantee loaned me 4 crores. It was a bank, HDFC as a matter of fact. And I built the hotel, and the pride and joy that I had as a middle-class guy, because my father was a government officer and my mother was a doctor in the army, was I built a very small pool in this hotel. And I'd never seen a pool, and I could never believe that I would have owned a pool. Now, India is full of wonderful laws. So there was, in 1888, in undivided Punjab, there was a drought. I don't know if any of you are aware of this. But there was a shortage of water 137 years ago. And the British put a rule saying there will be a water inspector who will approve any water body in Punjab, which included Gurgaon, which was part of Haryana. So when I built this hotel, what we didn't know, nobody told us, is the water inspector also has to approve this deal. So the hotel is open. I'm, salivating over this very tiny pool I built. Suddenly, and I go back to my office, and my general manager calls me and says, there's a guy who's come in with a bandolier, a gun, with a red light on a jeep. He happened to be the nephew of the one of the ministers there. It's a sinecure. It's a job to take a bribe. It's rent-seeking. Haryana was full of that. So he comes and he tells the general manager, how have you put up this pool here without my approval? He says, what are you talking about? He says, well, you need my approval. 1888 ka rule hai. So pay me $5,000 a month. By the way, I told this story to the Chief Minister of Haryana, and they eliminated that role. But anyway, $5,000 you will pay me every month, otherwise I'll shut your hotel. So a guy called me, I said, okay, fine. Tell him to come back next month. So when I went back to that hotel, I went and swam in that pool once. Then I told them to drain the water and fill the pool and make a lawn. So a month later, this guy came back. His name was some Chotala. He was a Chotala, actually, interestingly. And he said, give me my 5,000. He said, why? He said, where's your pool? We don't have a pool. So he said, are you guys mad? You've shut down a 10 lakh. He knew everything, 10 lakh. You see, when it comes to bribing and government, they are so efficient in knowing the exact value so that they can determine the rent seeking. It's amazing, right? So anyway, he said, you guys are mad. And the interesting thing is, after that, nobody ever came for a bribe to that hotel. Yeah. Because they said, these are mad guys. But this I learned from another mad group called the Parsis, because I was part of Tata's. And they behave like this.
What was that one moment when you actually transitioned from professional and decided to be an entrepreneur and do the buyout? And from there on, was there any point when you sort of had this dilemma that, why did I even do this? And was there a moment like that?
Sure. Actually, there were a couple. One, I think we did this under the radar screen because Jack Welch never wanted us to do this. So I had to do this myself, experimenting on the way. No phone lines. Even today, our office building on the highway in Gurgaon is in a shed because there was none of the glitz available that we surround ourselves with. Today, Vineet, you might have seen it. It's just a shed where we transform the inside. And then, we spun off. We raised capital with General Atlantic, Oak Hill, we spun off. Genpact today is 50,000 crores market cap. It's not doing badly, So, by the way, one lesson, do succession planning really well. If you can do it really well, it washes 1,000 sins that you have committed. But I think there were two elements which, to me, are seminal and important as lessons. And I was privileged to be with GE in one of them and not in the other one, or under the GE umbrella. So the first one was clearly 9/11. 9/11 had the power to destroy businesses all over the world. You had no idea where it was going. Planes weren't flying, people weren't going back and forth. Business stopped completely overnight. Boom, like an axe, it went down. And you were left trying to figure out exactly what you were going to do with your life. Cataclysmic event, which companies which are within their own spheres of countries are relatively unaffected by. Countries which are doing cross-border movements, particularly with the movement of people and resources, was cataclysmic for us. We did the huddle, we came together, we talked to the team. I must have talked to 5,000 people that day in the team. Directly, immediately about how do you manage the crisis, what are we going to do, the level of uncertainty we were facing, etc. And then we continued to do that over a period of a month because it took a while for the air to be opened up, for people to be allowed to go back and forth, for people to start thinking about business. And so to me, that was an enormous example of how to handle a crisis. And then the next one was when Lehman Brothers went down. And as Vineet would know, 50% of our business was financial services, and the financial services market imploded in front of our eyes. Our share price went on New York Stock Exchange from 15 to 4. Options that people had been given, everything got wiped out literally within a week. We were facing into enormous bad debts because companies we were doing business for could not pay us. Our clients were collapsing. Business was stopping. Absolute turmoil. And so again, to climb out of that, when we were an independent company and running as a New York Stock Exchange company, that took a different level of resilience from the team. And it was up to us to get the team galvanized, because losing spirit was the easiest thing we could have done. But maintaining that energy level and that resilience was the toughest thing. And I think, to me, I'll never forget that lesson in my life, especially as I watched Lehman Brothers come apart on my TV screen and knowing that all hell was going to break loose in the next week.
So we're running a little short on time, but if you were to give us one advice to any budding entrepreneur about how do you build resilience and what does it take to be a successful entrepreneur and go through all those hums?
To me, it would be two things that build resilience in a company. One is culture, and second one is your...
Personally as an entrepreneur, because before you institutionalize a company, it's just you leading everything.
So culture actually flows from the DNA of the entrepreneur in a certain sense. I think all entrepreneurs, one quality they need to have is to be stoic. You have to be able to meet with situations along with pragmatism, but also sometimes you have to be dogmatic with your thinking. You have to be singular in your approach. And you can't be recalcitrant about the future and be hesitant about what's coming up. You have to be an optimist. You have to work with people, and that will then flow down into the company as a cultural input. If you have this, I think you also attract the right set of people. So the culture and people that you have around you, and I'm sure my panelists here would know that. The people that you've built your company with actually make the business that you have. So that's, I think, the singular advice that I'll give to an entrepreneur.
Not very dissimilar. I think the two things I've learned, one is patience, because it's very easy to be impatient and, say, this is good, this is bad, let's do this. So Sun Tzu writes about this. Patience is what wins you always. That's the first thing. Number two, the other thing I've learned is so I think I was always an optimist. What I've learned in my life is this too shall pass. I think I mentioned it. So when everything is optimistic, I have tried to become as pessimistic as possible, which is difficult for me, but I try. And when things are pessimistic, well, I'm me. So I think, I don't know what we worry about in India. Once upon a time, in Indira Gandhi's time, the Hindu rate of growth was 2-3%. And, we were happy with it. Today at 5%, we weep. So, I mean, I don't bother too much about it. If your business can sustain 2 to 8%, and you haven't done anything catastrophic, I think you're fine, then you go. And that's what I've learned, at least in my last 5 years.
Sure.
Thank you, Patu. For me, in terms of what do I learn about being an entrepreneur in many ways, I just point to two things. One, surround yourself with people who are significantly better than you, and you must do that positively. I think very few people end up doing that. Who are better. Tiger is a better CEO than I was, and it's showing now in the company. So are many other people. So if you surround yourself with that, and surround yourself with diversity of mind, because then they bring ideas to the table, they solve problems, they do 1,000 things which you could never do on your own. So to me, that is a very essential element. Two is a word I learned from Ramcharan, who used to come and teach us often at Genpact and at GE, which is the word altitude. Just climb out of the daily morass, climb out of daily operation, and think big. One of the great things about the Chinese and the US companies is they think global. They want to go out and rule the world. They're not happy being market leaders in, northern India or somewhere. They will go out. So altitude to me means you will do a lot of things, but thinking about the big picture always, rather than getting stuck on the small stuff, allows you to build things of global scale and size. And I think that's something India Inc. must do, because we remain local, fundamentally. Even though we have some great companies, they're local.